Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Anne Haynes. I'm from Quad Orbis, a continuous controls monitoring platform company. And I'm thrilled to be partnering with Yash Technologies today to bring you this amazing lots of information packed filled session on DORA. We've got an exciting discussion ahead in collaboration with Yash Technologies, and we're going to be diving into this critical piece of legislation that impacts any organisation operating within the EU. So while the initial DORA deadline may have passed, the need for compliance is more urgent than ever. So today we're going to break down some of the key aspects of DORA, discuss the challenges of implementation, and most importantly, provide you with the actionable steps that you can take right now to achieve and maintain compliance. But firstly, I'd like to introduce our expert panel for today. We have two fantastic guests. Firstly, Jason, if I can come to you, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, thank you, Anwin, and really pleased to be here this afternoon. So Jason Wilkes, also of Quad Orbis. I've been in sort of information security since about the late 90s or so. Hence, I always tend to call it information security rather than cybersecurity. Currently my sort of role within sort of Quad Orbis is really helping customers sort of really digitize and sort of modernize their controls and their control sort of library. Typically, obviously, we see quite a lot of demand around sort of DORA sort of regulation at the moment. So, obviously have an interest in that. But previously, I was a PCI QSA and ISO 27001 lead auditor.
Thanks, Jason. And Maypal, if we can come to you.
Absolutely. Real pleasure being here. Again, like Jason, been in the industry from the 90s, but been very fortunate, been working with great teams. And right now, a lot of the roles involve me working with CISOs, which is an amazing experiences, especially when you come to security, cybersecurity, compliance, regulations. It's always been a learning. So I take pride in that and what kind of guidance we give CISOs, the same thing they give to us. So I've been pretty fortunate that way. I'm really looking forward to this session. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. So before we crack on, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions throughout the session, then please do pop them into the chat, and we're going to try and aim to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. The session should probably only last around about 30 minutes, so we won't keep you for too long. The webinar will also be recorded and shared with you on email in the next few days. So let's crack on. So this is just an overview of the agenda for today. So we're going to be going through the aims of DORA, the challenges of implementing it, managing the evolving regulatory landscape, what the consequences are of not being ready, and how to monitor all your regulatory compliance. So, Jason, I'm going to start with you. Can you please explain to our audience what DORA is and how companies can proactively leverage its principles to improve their overall cybersecurity posture and operational resilience?
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. A great place to start. Before we dive into there, it's probably worth just a little bit of scene setting in terms of, sort of why DORA, and I guess it sort of plays into the aims of DORA. So obviously back in 2008, we had the sort of financial crash. And then post there was a number of regulations which were put in place really to improve the sort of resilience of the sort of financial aspects of the sort of financial system. So, sort of stress testing and kind of liquidity requirements and such like that. But those sort of regulations never took into account the sort of the underpinning sort of systems and applications and services that we have these days. I think we all appreciate that it's we live in a very sort of interconnected world. It's most services are sort of cross-domain. So DORA sort of really just aims to, I guess, sort of level up that resilience by sort of bringing in the sort of technology and the service side within the sort of the regulations. I think it's also, it's sort of important to say that it is on obviously an EU regulation. And it's really one that's sort of aimed at sort of harmonizing the playing field across sort of all of the member states. As I mentioned, sort of we're in a very sort of cross-border world. So it's really about that sort of harmonization sort of piece. So I really talk about in terms of it being a regulation rather than a framework. I think our customers and a lot of, I guess, or some of the audience at least, would like the sort of the regulation to be sort of more framework-like, which is really just sort of, okay, well, give me a list of security controls and sort of areas that I need to implement, and then I can go away and know what I need to do. But obviously, being a sort of a regulation, it's sort of a slightly more sort of higher level, sort of aimed at sort of as I say, sort of harmonising across the member states. Equally, in the UK, we're obviously no longer a member state, but obviously countries like ourselves and really any countries that sort of interact with the EU financial institutions obviously need to sort of comply. But I guess also just moving away from the sort of framework and how organisations can sort of leverage some of the sort of good things within the sort of regulations. I mean, there's an opportunity there within the regulation to sort of maybe focus on some of the areas which hitherto have not really been sort of looked at in great depth. So if we look at the sort of 5 pillars of sort of DORA, we've got ICT risk management, the related incident management and reporting, operational resilience and testing, third-party risk management and information sharing. There's sort of the 5 pillars. But we can obviously sort of sort of focus on bridge on some of those pillars where they sort of focus on areas which I say have sort of hitherto not been majored on before. So really sort of more the operational resilience testing to sort of make sure our organisations are operational, and also the sort of the third party sort of risk management side of things. We all consume as well as supply services as part of our sort of delivery. So sort of really understanding what that sort of deep third-party supply chain looks like and what that impact is on our business also helps focus our minds with the regulation.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So, Maypal, if I can come to you. In your experience, what are some of the most common challenges organisations may face when implementing DORA?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people are worried about that, but let me assure everybody that most things are already in place. You need to make sure that you connect all the dots and represent it in the right way. So looking at the pillars themselves, if you take risk management as a pillar, the biggest challenges organizations are facing, CISOs are facing, is what they're seeing out there is a kind of a disconnected governance model, right? That integrated governance doesn't appear to be there. Especially teams seem to be still working in silos. You have your cyber security, you have your IT, you have your operation resistance, third-party risk teams. All that needs to come together as an integrated governance program. That is a challenge that some of the CISOs are facing, and that we are helping address through detailed integrated program governance models. Another area is the lack of clear risk visibility, especially when it comes to technology gaps. So the teams, the CISOs and other organizations need to have that almost real-time visibility into the kind of risks they are facing, especially from a technology perspective. What are the control gaps? So that is something that needs to be addressed. Another area is with regard to your incident reporting, right? That's a key aspect from DORA's perspective. Now, again, when GDPR came in, there was a lot of panic about that. The same thing is happening here within CISOs. We're seeing your reporting timelines are starting to be critical, but that again can be addressed. It's not it's a concern, but you need to address it in the right way, especially if you start your mapping your incident classification. Your reporting needs to be aligned to the DORA requirements. That's it. You would already have incident reporting processes in place, but make sure they're aligned to the DORA requirements. That's a key area. Another area is operational resilience testing. This is again important, a pillar, and a lot of CISOs are finding that there is a lack of technical expertise, whether it's scenario-led operational testings or whether it's threat-led penetration testing. So these things need to be addressed in a more enhanced way. No more your external VAPT test will suffice. You need to demonstrate that your programs are actually enhanced and meeting the requirements. When it comes to information sharing pillar, key aspects are you need to demonstrate your collaboration. So CISOs want to know where they can start. They need that guidance. What kind of threat intel I should be participating? And another big question is, what should I actually be sharing when it comes to information? So people are a little worried about that. But of course, there are processes go back to the basics, document your processes, have SOPs in place. In that way, you know which team to participate. That's the guidance they are actually looking for right now, right? Which scenario-based threat intel platforms they should be actually be participating on. Then, of course, one of the key focus areas is third-party risk management. A lot of concern there, but again, like I said, people are now using this as an opportunity. The third party has multiple challenges. Some of the key things what we are seeing with our CISOs is limited contractual controls, for example. A lot of CISOs have legacy vendors who are already there in place, who have been there in the system for 5 years, 10-year contracts. Are they now brought up to speed in terms of the security requirements that need to be in place? So that is a key concept with third party. Then, of course, continuous monitoring. It is no more just about you're doing your onboarding your vendor assessments, doing manual assessments, no more work. You need to leverage technologies. You need to have a continuous view of the risk that third parties there, and all based on your business criticality, right? If this particular vendor is important to your business, make sure they are there. You do a tiered based assessment, whether you need to do 6 months or 1 year, automate the whole process of third party risk. So that is a key focus area, third party risk. And there are luckily solutions in place which can meet the DORA requirements. Thank you, Anna. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Maypal, for that really clear description there. Really appreciate that. So, Jason, if we can come back to you now. So obviously DORA non-compliance carries significant risks. Can you paint a picture of the potential consequences of not being ready?
Yeah, fine. I mean, I think in terms of the sort of EU regulations and regulations in general, I think we're sort of used to them coming with teeth these days in the same way that sort of GDPR is. So again, much like sort of GDPR, the sort of risk of fines, and those fines are, sort of based around sort of severity of sort of incident or non-compliance, and also sort of based around, percentage points of sort of turnover. So again, those fines could be, sort of clearly significant. But I guess, sort of putting the actual sort of fines aside, then there's a sort of the wider sort of aspect. So, sort of reputational damage, sort of, non-compliance is a sort of a clear, sort of signal, I guess, that you've got sort of poor sort of internal practices and poor sort of risk management practices, and that in itself can, erode sort of trust with sort of customers and sort of investors and partners. So, kind of failing to sort of meet your sort of compliance obligations, and particularly sort of a breach or an incident that's reported, sort of, I think we clearly understand, the sort of the publicity that creates a bad publicity, and those sort of knock-on effects. I mean, and again, sort of without those sort of internal and sort of proper controls, any sort of cyber threats that we face, really become kind of harder to kind of detect and mitigate against. And I think we also have to bear in mind that DORA does have a strong sort of element of reporting and reporting timelines. So sort of being able to detect that sort of an incident has taken place, having the right sort of data available in the right sort of timeframes, and being able to report on that in an effective manner is obviously sort of key as well. And also, in terms of the sort of the wider context, the sort of knock-on effects are, as well as having sort of trust in your customers, you're kind of also operating in a sort of a regulatory market. So there could be impacts in terms of, not being able to sort of operate in that market any longer, or at least not being able to, sort of build those sort of services or shared services with, sort of partners who they themselves kind of, might sort of see you as an additional risk within their sort of, sort of third-party supply chain. So there's a whole, I guess, a whole sort of knock-on for the sort of the consequences of A, not being ready, but B, also sort of not being sort of compliant. But also kind of, to sort of spin that and sort of add a little bit of sort of positive, I guess, it kind of gives us a bit of an opportunity to sort of use that as a competitive advantage as well, in the sense of, just sort of, sort of proactively, sort of being compliant, being a good partner, sort of in this sort of service-led world. So, we can use that as a sort of a positive and as a competitive advantage, and maybe against sort of some of our other sort of services that we're competing with.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jason. So it kind of leads me on to the next point, really, to discuss with you both, that we've kind of touched on the challenges, we've touching on the consequences, but really that still doesn't help people understand how we're going to manage the evolving regulatory landscape. So, Maypal, if we can come to you, can we talk through with our audience about how organisations can shift their mindset and view DORA as an opportunity to improve their operational resilience and gain that competitive advantage rather than simply the cost of doing business?
Absolutely, Armin. So again, when GDPR came in, there was people were worried, okay, how many regulatory things we're going to do? So now we are seeing more and more regulatory requirements coming out, frameworks, standards, everything is placed, and they're kind of overlapping. The requirements are kind of overlapping. Regulatory fatigue has really become an issue and a concern with CISOs. But when you look at DORA, it's actually presenting an incredible opportunity. I'll get to that. A lot of the CISOs are actually using this as a real opportunity for organizations. Basically, fundamentally, you're strengthening your entire operational resilience, when I mentioned, and giving now the scenario when everything is on digital, resilience is a key aspect of continued business that you need to be doing. It's really critical. So it's not about compliance anymore. It's about ensuring that you as a business, you can withstand, respond, and recover from disruptions. That's the whole purpose. And DORA and CISOs are leveraging DORA to make sure they get the buy-in from their management, get buy-in from their business units from the beginning, to make sure that these programs are there in place. Because like Jason mentioned, the fines are pretty drastic when it comes to non-compliance with DORA. So like I mentioned, get your business leaders involved early. That's what is happening. CISOs are actually leveraging this to get that, do that. Business leaders are now seeing the value of operational resilience, right? How improved resilience can actually build customer trust, build business growth. That is what they are seeing. So, and another part is now use DORA to streamline compliance across regulations. Like I mentioned, there's an overload of regulations, overload of standards. But when you start doing, go to the basics, have a unified compliance framework, map all your controls, whether it's your NIST, whether it's your ISO, whether it's your SOC 2, whether it's your SOX integration. Start mapping those controls. You're going to find out that you're actually reducing duplication of efforts. You're actually going to optimize your resources when you start doing these exercises, and start prioritizing. For example, I'm just giving an example. Third party is a key focus area, let's say, for DORA. And a lot of our customers are saying that their customers are also really worried about supplier security. With this, if you have a transparent, robust third party system in place, you are actually winning over customer confidence in the end of the day. That's what CISOs are actually using to get the buy-in and implement these more enhanced programs within, for example, third party. I have a very unique case study what I've seen with one of our customers. He leveraged third party risk management, enhanced his entire program. He automated the entire third-party thing, and for good measure, added in threat intelligence, added in external, attack surface management, and then at the end of the day, it's all automated. He's got data points at his fingertips, and he, as a regular basis, is able to present this to the board as a value, what they are seeing. So he uses operational resilience testing and third party as clear data points as and to enhance the business. He's able to bring these data points. He's able to report these exact data, real-time data back to the boards, and they're finding it pretty useful, right? So that's what I said. Embed resilience. So now when it comes to operational experience, the mandate is now you need to have threat-led penetration testing from operational resilience. So now this way, when you have this enhanced programs in place, you are definitely ensuring operational resilience excellence, I would say, right? So that's where you need to start looking at these things. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, not mention that your resources, you're optimizing to the best. You're able to prioritize this. So it's an excellent opportunity for CISOs. And a lot of them are actually leveraging this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Maypal. So, Jason, let's think about what organizations can do now. Can you just guide us through what you would advise people to do?
Yeah, so I think number one would actually be to download the regulation and have a read of it. It sort of surprises me sometimes how many people I speak to, and they need to be DORA compliant or compliant to a new regulation, but haven't actually downloaded it or read it. So I think that's a really good, not rocket science, but a really good place to sort of start. With sort of DORA, I did talk about it being a high level regulation, but there is also some associated regulatory technical standards and implementation standards. And I think they sort of give slightly more sort of substance and maybe, in terms of the sort of questions that I get asked, really a bit more sort of pointers in, sort of what you need to do to be sort of DORA compliant. So the detail sort of is in there. It's maybe not in kind of maybe not in a format that we would sort of prefer, because as I said, it is kind of like quite a high level regulation, but ultimately the sort of the detail sort of is in there if we can sort of take time just to sort of read through it and sort of understand kind of what the key requirements are. I think it's also sort of worth looking at, if we talked a little bit about the 5 pillars and I think the sort of EU have done us a little bit of a favor in there, because not all of the pillars are kind of created equal in that sense. And what I mean by that is the first pillar, have an ICT risk management framework. I think sort of pretty much everybody in our audience today would have a framework in place, be that sort of ISO 27001 or sort of NIST CSF. So I think, in essence, there's a good pillar there that's already sort of in place. And then that sort of really allows us to focus on maybe sort of some of the other areas where that are the focus in DORA, but some places where we're not sort of really looking at sort of at the moment. So we sort of talked about the sort of the third party sort of management side of things, and again looking at the sort of technical standards. There's a fair amount of information there in terms of the level of detail and what you need to sort of maintain sort of in terms of your sort of third parties. So again, that's kind of really key part, I think, to sort of focus on. I think most people will sort of have a third party register, and that they may sort of do sort of annual sort of vendor sort of self-assessments, but in terms of sort of DORA, it goes sort of a lot deeper than that. And then also, I think we're sort of used to sort of testing, sort of running sort of penetration testing cycles and such like. So again, sort of DORA sort of takes that and sort of extends that and sort of more into sort of resilience. And I think Mayapal mentioned the sort of the threat led, so making those sort of testing more aligned to sort of what happens in the sort of the modern world. I guess ultimately what I'm kind of describing, and maybe sort of grab Mayapal's thoughts, but kind of ultimately, we've had practice before with previous regulations coming in, be that sort of GDPR or sort of PCI. So, sort of really looking at a traditional sort of gap analysis type project to sort of really understand, sort of where we are, sort of identify the gaps, and then, sort of ultimately sort of create a plan to sort of close those gaps. So clearly, sort of, aligning to DORA is going to have an impact on the organization. So, sort of having a clear allocation of, sort of resources and responsibilities, in terms of sort of setting up that program, identifying its scope, and ultimately running that program is kind of really something that needs to be, sort of set underway.
Okay, thanks, Jason.
I just like to add there a point that Jason just mentioned really resonated with me. The first time when we talked to a CISO about DORA, we actually had to download the entire thing and then give different audiences an idea of the control. We had one set of controls where we were talking about to the CISO, a different language we need to talk to the risk team, different language we need to the third party and compliance team. So this was an interesting scenario, but right now people are cross-functionally starting to work, because that's what is happening with DORA is actually bringing that kind of thing there. And coming to gap assessments, I still believe exactly what Jason is saying. What do you do right now? Do the assessment. Go back to the basics. List down what the DORA requirements, do a gap analysis, know where you're at, and then go ahead, create a roadmap, a practical roadmap, get the buy-in for the management, and start implementing these as individual programs to make sure that you are ready as soon as possible with respect to DORA. Yeah, that's what I just wanted to add to that thing. Yeah, thanks,
No,
Jason.
thanks.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for adding that. So actually, I'm going to come back to you anyway, Maypal, because obviously maintaining DORA compliance isn't going to be a one-time activity.
Yeah.
It's going to obviously require ongoing monitoring because manual compliance monitoring is often inefficient and error-prone. So how can organizations practically implement something like continuous controls monitoring to ensure they're staying on top of regulatory requirements and proactively identifying potential compliance gaps?
Absolutely. So now when we look at DORA or any other regulation for that matter, as we are evolving, continuous control monitoring is kind of a given mandate. Like I mentioned earlier, if you need to know the risks, you need to actually know your technology gaps. You need to be monitoring all your technology related controls. That's a key aspect of enhancing your risk management program. So start with the basics, right? Make a practical implementation plan when you come to continuous control monitoring. Start, so we have been doing this for a few of our organizations, and we now right now have a templatized model. However, we keep tweaking it based on business context. So we are seeing this work, right? You start the basics, define your scope, define your CCM scope, define what CCM needs to achieve in the end of the day, right? That's key. Get in your management buy-in, and trust me, now business leaders want to be part of this from the day one, right? That's what we're seeing across the board. And then you have establish a framework. So this is the opportunity for you. You have multiple regulations that you need to comply with, right? So go back to the basics. Again, I would say old school, have a unified control framework in place, map it back to not just DORA, but your ISO 27K, your NIST. A lot of customers are using this opportunity. When you have a continuous control monitoring technology solution in place, you make sure you're monitoring for DORA, you make sure you're monitoring for your other requirements as per mandatory requirements, like your ISO 27A. And a lot of our CISOs are actually throwing in good measures, especially on the Europe side, where NIST is not so much popular, but people understand this from a technology. And since the platform actually offers that, throw in NIST cybersecurity framework, good measure. You are able to actually have a big view there, and you are able to monitor all the technology related controls, what is actually needed to make sure that you have real-time insights on your current cybersecurity posture, as well as what are the potential compliance gaps that you are seeing and need to fix. That's the need of the hour. Then, apart from that, see, like I mentioned, automate all about any audits which are coming, any requirement. You need to have your artifacts, your evidence, your audit reports at your fingertips at any given time. You need to do that, and continuous control monitoring actually allows you to do that. Integrate it through your start automating. Integrate it through your existing technology solutions like your SIEM, your identity and access management solutions, your Active Directory, your ITSM platform. Integrate those solutions with a centralized visibility with continuous control monitoring, right? So this way, you're not only automating the evidence collections that auditors would expect to see, you're actually automating your entire control verification process, which is very important, right? For example, you can start pulling your real-time patching data from your existing vulnerability tools, whether it's Tenable or Qualys. Just integrate and start pulling that data, and you have the visibility there. Start implementing real-time dashboards. Start implementing alert mechanisms for any control failure or control deviation. You might have missed something, it is alerting you. Have use automation for that, right? And you have real-time dashboard. That's what I'm talking about. Near real-time or real-time dashboard showing you your compliance status, showing you what you're not non-compliant, what are the potential vulnerabilities, and what could impact your overall compliance that you need to demonstrate back to the auditors. So this is where continuous control monitoring it plays a huge factor. And at the end of the day, you will find yourself actually, working as a unified team. That's what when you say control, it's not just your tools and technologies, but the different views it affords. You'll be fostering cross-functional collaboration. by default. It comes as a add into any kind of solution like this, where you have different teams having different views and different dashboards and things. That's what finally you wind up having. And use this opportunity. You're actually building operational resilience excellence. You're fostering that within the organization. With the end of the day, that's what you need to keep doing business these days, especially when everything is on the cloud. You're digital. You need to be resilient to what the kind of threats and attacks or what is happening right now in the industry. Yeah, those are my two bits here. Jason, if you want to add something here, I missed something, then please feel free to add.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I mentioned earlier we're sort of modernizing controls, and really in terms of that sort of continuous control monitoring, there is a heavy element of sort of automation behind that. So really what we're doing is kind of sort of orchestrating kind of all those different sort of data points and data source that you already have inside of your environment. So, you mentioned those sort of core sort of technology solutions, and all that information is kind of quite siloed. So what we're looking to do is sort of take that out in an automated fashion. And as I say, yeah, sort of orchestrate and those sort of data points. And really, as you mentioned, in terms of the sort of the control piece, customers are sort of doing that already, but they're doing that in a very manual basis. It's all spreadsheet based. They're doing it sort of once a quarter, once a year. And so if you can sort of cut down on that sort of manual level of workload, the sort of the real repeatable, sort of spreadsheet and reports and VLOOKUPs and, that if you can sort of automate that and put that to sort of one side, do it once and sort of then being able to sort of run it multiple times in real time. And then that obviously sort of takes away that manual workload and sort of frees up, teams to, be more proactive and look at these sort of new regulations and do that sort of new kind of assessment and keeping ahead of the curve as opposed to sort of struggling to be at the tail of the curve, I guess.
Great. Thanks both. So we've sort of come to the end of the main bulk of the session, and I can see that we've actually got some time for a couple of quick questions actually. So I think this one's for you, Jason, really. Can you give some examples, some concrete examples of ICT risk management under DORA and how we can assess and mitigate these risks? That was a question from one of our audience members.
Okay, yeah, good question. So I guess in terms of some sort of concrete examples, where sort of DORA looks more like a traditional framework, there's elements of protection and prevention, sort of response and recovery, backup policies, learning and evolving and such like. So they're probably quite familiar. One area that it sort of does talk about sort of really is having mechanisms for sort of promptly being able to detect anomalous activities. And I think that's a sort of quite important, partly from the sort of really being able to sort of meet your sort of reporting sort of requirements, so when you've got sort of a breach or downtime or any of those sort of anomalous activities. So that's sort of one area, real sort of concrete area where sort of DORA calls out.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I think we've got time for one more question. I think one for you, Maypal, actually. What kind of operational resilience testing does DORA envisage? Have you got any examples of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And especially given DORA and how much importance operational resilience testing is part of the entire regulatory requirement, that's a pretty important factor. So what we are seeing now is no more does your current VAPT kind of or penetration testing scenarios, although it's there, you're doing it, but you really need to step up the game here. You really need to enhance your entire program, your external attack surface management program. You need to have threat-led penetration testing. That's actually what they're asking. So here, what you do is you're actually focusing on simulating real-world cyber attacks. So that's now possible. You do that. You target your critical services, their underlying infrastructure. What are the services important to business? Make sure you're able to document this entire exercise and demonstrate that these are the critical services that you're testing. These are the kind of pen tests you are actually doing, which is again threat-led, intelligence-fed. You combine it with all your other programs, for example, your threat hunting program. See what you need to be doing, and then report it back to the management in the right way. So that's a key aspect from the operational resilience testing perspective. Another key aspect is where people are finding this is actual scenario based resilience testing. Yeah, you need to combine cyber incidents, your technology gap failures, your third party outages. Try to bring that all into a real time scenario, and then try to assess end to end business and technology response, how they're actually going to respond. Tabletop exercise. Now, we leverage technology to do that. You actually need to do that. This will involve your senior management, your IT, your business teams to actually test their decision-making capabilities, right? You need to check, are the communications flows in place? Are you ready for the regulatory reporting timelines, especially during a severe disruptions? You can now test those. You can now leverage technology to do these tabletop exercises. That's a thing what actually DORA requires. So these three critical areas is what is expected from to meet the DORA requirement. And yeah, so that's from make sure your processes, your incident reporting processes are aligned as per the DORA requirements. So that's a key thing. So these things are there now in place. Technologies are there to help support CISOs with these kind of exercises. I really hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Maypal. I can see that we've got a few more questions, but I think we're really out of time right now. So for those of you who've posted questions in the chat, we will reach out to you individually and answer those questions. But what I'd like to do is just firstly say thank you, Maypal from Yash Technologies. Thank you very much for your informative insights. And Jason, thank you to you too from Quad Orbis, both of you for giving us such a great session today on DORA. And thank you to the audience for attending, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. So thanks a lot and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.